Hello, my name is Amy Godwin, and today we are going to talk about radar. Before diving into the history of radar, we should learn what radar is. Radar is radio detecting and ranging. It's a device that releases short electromagnetic pulses that reflect off of objects and back into the radar system. It is an active sensing device that uses 400 megahertz to 40 gigahertz. There are exceptions though. There is long range, which uses lower frequencies, and high frequency, which is for laser radar and LiDAR. There are four basic components of a radar system: a transmitter that creates pulses, a transmit or receiver switch that tells when to release a pulse, an antenna that sends and receives pulses, and a receiver that makes it into video format. If velocity of an object is needed, a Doppler radar is used. It calculates the speed of an object moving towards or away the radar. Now onto history. Research for electromagnetic waves reflecting off of different surfaces started with James Clerk Maxwell, who did theoretical work and created equations for electromagnetic fields. That furthered into German physicist Heinrich Hertz's work, who verified the theoretical work of Maxwell in 1888 with radio waves at 455 megahertz. Early testing started in Germany, America, Great Britain, and many other countries. They had researched radar before World War II, but were not interested because of a lack of need. Their findings needed two antennae, therefore it could not be used for detecting enemy planes. Later, in 1930, during many depressions and recessions that would eventually lead to the start of World War II, L.A. Highland saw a fluctuation in transmission with one antenna where a plane was overhead. Now, they only need one antenna to detect enemy planes. This would eventually turn into the SCR-270 that detected the approach of Japanese bombers at Pearl Harbor. Plane radar during World War II started with the first demonstration of military radars. It occurred on May 26, 1937, which would eventually turn into SCR-268 in 1940. Next, Louis Walter Alvarez invented the radio distance and direction indicator, which was used as a landing system for aircrafts from 1944 to 1945. It has the patent number 2480208. Lastly, the first patent of the Object Locating System, or radar, was awarded to Major William Blair, the director of Signal Corps Laboratories, in 1957. Naval radar during World War II started with the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory. They explored radar and sonar for detecting sounds and objects underwater. U-boat threats accelerated this research. In 1949, SOFAR, or sound fixing and ranging hydrophones, were invented. Dr. Maurice Ewing set up this system in Bermuda. Once nuclear-powered submarines were created, low-frequency, or LF sonar, was used to detect pathways for hundreds of miles. This can also be used for mapping underwater geography. Before World War II, very high frequency, or VHF radar, was invented. Germany used this since the start of World War II. It does have a few problems though. It has sound clutter, low accuracy, and the pulses did not go as far as the new technology. Radar development was halted in 1940 when the Germans and the Axis forces thought they had won the war. When they restarted research, it was too late and they had already lost. After World War II, MIT developed microwave radar systems, and over 100 of them. The most famous one was SCR-584. It was a gunfire control system. It replaced the SCR-268 since the Germans had a jamming system for it. It could target without optics or lights, meaning it was extremely accurate even in the dark. Radar was revealed to the public after World War I, after being top secret in the US. In Britain, they had wanted to give the information out earlier. As seen in the newspaper on the right, the New York Times released information of the basics of radar. It was revealed that radar during D-Day allowed none of the Allied army men to be killed by a bomb that was aimed by the radar system they had. Nowadays, we use radar to track aircrafts, spacecrafts, ships at sea, and insects and birds. We also use it for remote sensings of the environment, ballistic missile detectors, airborne bomber radar, measuring planets and mapping environments, and Doppler radar weather systems.
The Transatlantic Flights with Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart by Kyle Jobman. Charles Lindbergh was a very famous American aviator as he was the first person to fly solo non-stop across the Atlantic Ocean. He was born in 1902 and sadly died in 1974. Before he flew across the Atlantic Ocean, he was a stunt pilot in the Navy and was an airmail pilot, flying mail across the U.S. On May 20th, 1927, Charles Lindbergh would become the first person to fly non-stop solo across the Atlantic Ocean, but flying from New York to Paris in France. He would do this in his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, which included a 225 horsepower Wright Whirlwind motor, thanks to the Wright brothers who had created this years before. Once he had completed the flight, he was awarded with the Ordig Prize, which was $25,000 and was created in 1919 by Raymond Ordig as an award for the first person who would fly across the Atlantic Ocean. He was also awarded with the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is a very prestigious award in the military. Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight would start in New York, where he took off from Roosevelt Field and end in Le Bourget Airfield in Paris, France. The total flight would consist of 3,600 miles, and he would do it in a record-breaking time of 33 hours and 30 minutes. Before he completed this, he had also set the record for fastest time to fly coast-to-coast in the United States, flying from California to New York, which would take him 21 hours and 20 minutes. Moving along to Amelia Earhart, who is another very famous American aviator, as she was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. She was born in 1897 and unfortunately disappeared in 1937 while on a flight to circumnavigate the globe. Some people would call her the female Lindbergh due to some of her accomplishments in the aviation field. Earhart had two notable flights, as one of them was she flew as a passenger across the Atlantic Ocean with Captain H. H. Raleigh in 1928, which America dubbed her the female Lindbergh, as she was the first woman to ever fly across the Atlantic Ocean. But then, in 1932, she became the first woman to fly it solo in a record-breaking time of 14 hours and 56 minutes as she flew from Newfoundland, Canada to Ireland. Although Amelia Earhart was the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, and even do it solo, she also had some other very notable moments in her career, as she was the first woman to fly solo non-stop from California to Hawaii, and she even flew non-stop from Mexico to Newark, New Jersey. And she was even determined to circumnavigate the globe alongside her partner Fred Noonan, but unfortunately it ended up in her disappearing and her plane crashing somewhere in the Caribbean. Both Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart made great advancements in the aviation field and in the way pilots see long-distance flights without stopping. Their accomplishments paved the way for long-distance flights and international flights that we see today, involving flying across oceans or even countries. Both of these aviators have made a huge impact on the aviation field and in the way it impacts our lives today.
The space race. The space race was a struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. This took place during the Cold War and lasted from 1957 to 1969. 1957. On October 4th, 1957, the USSR sent the first satellite into space. This was called Sputnik 1. On November 3rd, the USSR sent the first animal into space. It was a dog named Laika. In 1958, the U.S. made their first advancement in the space race. On February 1st, the first U.S. satellite was sent into orbit. It was called Explorer 1. At this point, the USSR was leading the space race. On April 9th, 1959, NASA was created by the U.S. government. On April 12th, 1961, the USSR sent the first human into space. His name was Yuri Gagarin on the Vostok 1. On February 20th, 1962, the U.S. sent the first American into space. This was John Glenn on the Mercury Atlas 6. On June 16th through 19th of 1963, the first woman was sent into space. The USSR sent her on the Vostok 6. Her name was Valentina Tereshkova. On October 12, 1964, the Soviet Union sends the first multi-person spacecraft into orbit. This was Vladimir Komarov, Konstantin Fyodorov, and Boris Yegorov on the Voskhod 1. 1965 was a big year for the space race. On March 18th, the first spacewalk was completed by Alexei Leonov on the Voskhod 2. On March 23rd, the first U.S. multi-person spacecraft was launched into space. This was done by Virgil Grissom and John Young on the Gemini 3. On June 3rd, the first American spacewalk was achieved by Ed White on the Gemini 4. And on December 15th, the first orbital rendezvous occurred. There were 2 pilots on each spacecraft, Gemini 6 and Gemini 7. In 1966, on February 3rd, the first soft landing on the moon was completed by the Soviet Union and their ship Luna 1. A soft landing is when a spacecraft makes contact with the moon without crashing / remaining intact. On March 16th, the first docking in space was completed. This was done by Neil Armstrong and David Scott on the Gemini 8 with Agena target. On April 23, 1967, the space race suffered its first fatality. Vladimir Komarov of the USSR died during the launch of Soyuz 1. Vladimir Komarov was also one of the astronauts on the first multi-person spacecraft. On September 14th through 21st of 1968, the first spacecraft to fly around the Moon and return to Earth. This was done by the Soviet Union and their ship Zond 5. On October 11th, 1968, the first flight for the Apollo program occurred. This was Walter Sciarra, Don Elsey, and Walter Cunningham on the Apollo 7. On December 24th, the first crewed flight around the Moon, completed by American astronauts Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders on the Apollo 8. Finally, 1969, the end of the space race. July 3rd was the explosion of the NI moon rocket of the Soviet Union. On July 20th, the first humans land on the Moon. This was accomplished by U.S. astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the Apollo 11. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and have a great rest of your day.
NASA. NASA, or National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was created in 1958, mainly because of the Soviets taking big strides in the space race, like the Sputnik launch shortly before NASA's creation, and within almost 10 years, NASA put a man on the Moon. Certain things going on this time, from around 1960 to 1975 for my project, include the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the space race, civil rights movements, and the Vietnam War. Okay, so one of the first things I want to touch on is going to be the Apollo missions. The Apollo program is probably one of NASA's most recognizable space programs. In May of 1961, former President John F. Kennedy wanted to put a man on the Moon by 1970. Hence, the Apollo program was born. Their first attempt, Apollo 1 in 1967, failed tragically, killing all 3 members. However, within almost 2 years, they bounced back, and by the end of July in 1969, they had put 2 men on the Moon. Their names, you probably know, are Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin. Due to their perfect execution of launch, landing, and re-entry, the men survived the trip back home to Earth. This revolutionized space travel, in turn sending 10 more men to the Moon and even driving a rover on the Moon during Apollo 15. The next one I want to talk about are the Voyager missions. The Voyager missions in 1977 were 2 unmanned surveillance satellites that destined for outer solar system travel. These satellites, using precise planning and alignment of planet's gravitational field, slingshot themselves to speeds well over 10 miles per second, or 35,000 miles per hour. These probes were the first to ever take close-up pictures of the distant planets. And from this, we learned that Uranus has 10 more moons than what we predicted before, along with 3 complete rings around Neptune. The probes have been operating for over 40 years and over 14 billion miles away. They have recently left our solar system, but there are predictions they will run out of fuel for transmission back to Earth by 2030. In these satellites contains the Voyager Golden Record and a record player, a recording about our culture, disputes, and everything about us. This is in case our satellites get intercepted by any extraterrestrial group, so that they will be able to know that they aren't alone. These achievements open the doors to many more opportunities in space surveillance travel, and with camera improvements and battery life, it could be done better. Okay. Other various achievements. Landsat, NASA's Earth Resources satellite, reports back changes in the environment and has been monitoring global warming since 1972. Recently, they had sent up another Landsat in 2013 to replace the almost 50-year-old satellites. And then the Hubble Space Telescope, which was the first sophisticated optical observatory to orbit around Earth, has also been replaced recently by the James Webb Space Telescope.
The idea of the Hubble telescope was first conceived in the 1940s by a Yale astrophysicist called Lyman Spitzer. The idea was originally named the Large Space Telescope, and it paved the way for the Hubble telescope as we know it today. Spitzer believed that a space-based observatory would be highly advantageous compared to an Earth-based observatory. because it could observe infrared and ultraviolet light that were otherwise absorbed by Earth's atmosphere, and because it has a much higher resolution rate only limited by diffraction. Spitzer spent a large part of his career advocating for the creation of the telescope. After NASA was created in 1958, in the midst of the Cold War space race between the US and Russia, a special focus was put on space-related projects. However, the Large Space Telescope did not receive much attention until 1969, when the National Academy of Sciences published a report titled The Scientific Uses of the Large Space Telescope. In 1974, the first working group meeting between astrophysicists, engineers, and astronomers was held to outline the concepts, budgets, and technical requirements of the project. On October 1st, 1977, Congress approved funding for the project, and in December of 1978, the construction of the telescope's primary mirror began. The mirror was 2.4 meters wide and was specifically shaped to focus incoming light at a desired target. The telescope was designed to be upgraded while in space, so astronauts were trained for servicing missions beginning in 1979. The Space Telescope was named after astronomer Edwin Hubble, the man credited with discovering the Hubble constant. The Hubble Space Telescope's launch was originally meant to take place in 1986, but after the destruction of the Challenger shuttle, all space shuttle launches and flights in the U.S. were delayed. Finally, 4 years later, on April 24, 1990, the Hubble Space Telescope, along with 5 astronauts, were launched into space on board the Discovery Space Shuttle from NASA's Kennedy Space Station in Merritt Island, Florida. It was deployed from the shuttle and sent into Earth's orbit the next day, beginning its work almost immediately. Hubble's first image was taken on May 20th, 1990. The image was taken using the wide field camera and planetary camera to help with focusing the telescope. The image shows the binary star HD 96755 from the open cluster NGC 3532, which was located about 1,300 light-years away. Over the course of its existence, the Hubble Space Telescope has had many memorable discoveries. On August 29, 1990, the Hubble telescope captured an image of a supernova's aftermath. Supernova 1987A's ring resolved, which was captured by Hubble's camera. On January 16, 1991, Hubble estimated the accurate distance from the Large Magellanic Cloud galaxy to ours, about 169,000 light-years away. On May 17, 1991, Hubble released its first image of Jupiter. On January 13, 1992, astronomers used Hubble to detect elements from the early universe. On November 19, 1992, the Hubble telescope captured observations of a black hole consuming raw material. On May 25, 1995, the Hubble telescope saw the birth of a star inside of the Eagle Nebula. Fairly recently, on June 27, 2018, the Hubble telescope captured an image of Oumuamua, the first known interstellar object in our solar system. On September 13, 2019, the Hubble telescope discovered water vapor on an exoplanet found in the habitable zone. The Hubble Space Telescope continues to discover new phenomena throughout space today. It recently captured images of star clusters, white dwarf stars, Herbig-Haro objects, which are ionized gas jets expelled by newly formed stars, and a formation of 2 separate galaxies and a quasar, all of which were images taken within the last 2 months.
Aviation and aircraft of World War I. Recon airplanes would fly above the battlefield and determine the enemy's movements and position. Bombers would also drop bombs on strategic enemy locations. First, planes could only carry small bombs, which were very vulnerable to attack from the ground. By the end of the war, long-range bombers were built to carry larger weight bombs. Machine guns and dogfights. When more countries started to use planes, they began to fight in the air. At first, they tried to dogfight with grenades and rifles, but later found out a mounted machine gun worked better. Bullets from the gun got in the way of the propeller, so Germany later found out a way to fix that. They invented an item called the interceptor. It made machine guns synchronized with the propeller. Also, airships were used for bombings and recon, also often used in naval battles. Sea and airborne weapons. It made killing from a distance more effective. It also had guns mounted on ships which were able to strike enemies from up to 20 miles inland. Lastly, airplanes were technically crewed. Infantry warfare. It depended upon hand-to-hand combat. Also, World War I popularized the machine gun, which was capable to bring multiple rows of enemies down. Lastly, barbed wires and mines made land movement / combat difficult and dangerous. Radar. It was a technology that would be in planes over soldiers on the ground that would show nearby planes or enemies and how far away from friendly positions. It also helped Allied forces defeat enemy ships and planes, but also guided civilian planes and helped detect major storms. Atomic bomb. It was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It also served as notable markers to the end of the fighting in the Pacific. Jet engines and jet planes. They could go faster than propeller planes, but required a lot of fuel and more difficult to handle.
Howdy, my name is Andrew Kauskas, and today I'm going to talk to you all a bit about the history of commercial aviation and passenger planes and how it affected aviation history. Alright, so on this slide I'm going to talk to you all a bit about the history of passenger and commercial flights, and it's pretty much just the basics of how commercial aviation kind of became a thing. So first off, in 1908, Wilbur Wright, the founder of flight and the creator of the plane, took the first passenger flight with an employee of his. And this was pretty big because it showed how these planes could carry more than one person and they could still fly. So having two heavy people inside this little light metal frame was pretty unique at the time. And then that led to the more advanced style of planes that were built a little stronger so they could carry these people and still be able to fly. But yeah, after that in 1910, the first commercial flight school opened, and this was a big deal because you can't fly commercially without a commercial registered flyer. So having people who are able to fly was a big deal. So that's why I put it on there. And in another year after that, in 1911, Burgess & Co. was the first ever licensed commercial aircraft manufacturer. So you can't fly commercially if you don't have commercially made planes. So it kind of goes hand in hand. So these back then, most of the aircraft made were either homemade or made by Burgess & Co. Or after that, I'm pretty sure many other companies started to appear, but Burgess & Co. was the first ever commercial aircraft manufacturer. And about 3 years after that, in 1914, the St. Petersburg-Tampa airboat line operated the first scheduled commercial airline flight. So this was a big deal because it's the first commercial flight, you know? And it was a 23-minute hop across the Tampa Bay that covered around 18.6 miles, and it was piloted by Tony Janus. And the first passenger was the previous mayor of the city, who paid actually $400 for the ticket. So, and this is pretty unique because this pretty much sparked commercial aviation from there on out, and it kind of showed how these planes can carry other people, and it shows how flying is a really effective way of transporting things back and forth because it saves so much time, and without having anything to interfere with you, like trees, roads, or water, it was just the most efficient way possible to do and transport things at the time. All right, so on this slide, I'm going to talk to you all a bit about some media coverage of the achievement and some images I've got. So it was actually kind of difficult to find media coverage of the event, or it was all just like pictures of a little news article stating like how the first commercial flight happened and who piloted it. Pilot was Tony Janus, as I said back on slide 2. But I did find this cool article by Business Insider, and it was celebrating the 100th anniversary of the first commercial flight. So I'll just read it off for you. I thought it was pretty cool. So just a few weeks after marking the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight, the aviation world has another historical moment to celebrate. A century ago today, commercial aviation was born. The St. Petersburg-Tampa airboat line operated the first scheduled airline flight. It was a 23-minute hop across Tampa Bay that covered about 18.6 miles. And if you want to read any more of that, I put the link right below it, so you can, if you want to read a bit more about it, you can. It was pretty interesting. I enjoyed it. And on the right, I've got the picture of the first ever like flyer, advertising the flight that you could like pay $5 for just a straight trip across the river. And back then, $5 was kind of expensive, but now that seems like a steal. And you could pay $10 for a round trip. And yeah, it's just pretty neat how flights evolved so much, and how back then all it was just paid $5 and you could just go on a plane. And so another thing I got to talk about is the world events that happened during the advancement. And on June 28th, 1914, Archduke Francis Ferdinand was assassinated, and we all know what happened after that. Pretty much exactly a month later, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and that started World War I. And I thought that was pretty cool that first commercial flight also took place in the First World War. Even though planes weren't used in the First World War, it was still cool to see how commercial flight originated at the same time. All right, and lastly, I'm just going to talk about how this achievement created advancements in STEM, and science, and aerospace engineering. So for STEM and science, the advancement of commercial flight showed how heavier-than-air flight could be achieved while carrying multiple living things. This advanced science and engineering because it opened up the possibility to create machines that can not only fly, but carry cargo and living cargo comfortably in a safely and timely manner. And it also advanced aerospace engineering. It actually not really created aerospace engineering, but it created the concept that we needed an engineering type field for planes and flight. So this achievement advanced the future of aerospace engineering by showing how aircraft can hold large amount of weight and still be able to fly long distances. And over time, aerospace engineers improved upon the designs to make aircraft more aerodynamic, fuel efficient, faster, luxurious for people and cargo, etc. So in conclusion, this achievement was the foundation for all other achievements in commercial flight, and that came after the first commercial and passenger flight. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day.